So, welcome back to our next episode of the Let's Chat Derbyshire podcast, where we talk about mental health, suicide prevention and neurodiversity. I'm Luke and I work in the Derbyshire Public Health, Mental Health and Suicide Prevention team. So, we hope you're doing well, and today we're lucky to be joined by Poppy, where we're going to be talking about her experience of miscarriage and a bit around ADHD. If you're not already, do follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, where we post more information around what we speak about. And if you are listening on Spotify or YouTube, do give us a like and comment. Just to get us started, how are you feeling out of 10?
I'm a bit nervous about this.
Yeah.
So I'd probably say maybe about a 6. I think I'll probably
That's good.
feel better
Yeah.
throughout. You know,
Yeah.
It's a big thing to talk about.
It is. No, it is. And yeah, we really appreciate you coming on and, just sharing, what we're going to be talking about, because it's not spoken about enough, is it?
No, definitely
I think
not.
it's still got a cloud of stigma hovering over it constantly.
Massively.
So hopefully this will help just, take those barriers down a bit. But yeah, I'm feeling probably about a 7 today. We're filming this on a Friday. And we all know what we feel like on a
Yeah.
Friday. So yeah, no, that's great. So Poppy, today we've already said we'll be speaking about miscarriages and your experience after a miscarriage. Really can't thank you enough for, being here and opening up about your experience of it. To get us started, if you wouldn't mind just giving a bit of an introduction of, who you are and sort of your initial experience with it.
Yeah. So I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome a while back. My husband and I, he wasn't my husband back then, but we had been trying to get pregnant for sort of 6 months or so. Nothing had happened. I had really irregular periods, couldn't really lose any weight. So I went to the doctor. They referred me to a gynecologist and they confirmed with blood tests and scans that I did have polycystic ovaries. I was going to struggle to get pregnant. I was given medication called metformin, and what that does is it lowers your blood sugar. It's initially used for diabetes, but with polycystic ovarian syndrome comes high blood sugars. So it helps regulate that, helps you ovulate, and obviously the egg is the thing that you need to get pregnant. So as soon as I was given that medication, I thought, fantastic, things are going to happen. And then a month later, my husband got made redundant. So we had to put everything on hold. We got married in May. We said, we've got a holiday in September. Let's start trying around that time. And then what happens. I got pregnant in October. It was sort of the middle of October I found out. And then I experienced what is called a chemical pregnancy. So that is a loss before 5 weeks. So the egg is fertilised, but it doesn't implant properly. So the body recognises that there's something not quite right with that egg, and it says, no, thank you, this one's not going to happen, which is really, really upsetting because, having waited so many years, having that positive test, and then the test slowly got more and more negative. And then I had a negative test one day, about 10 days after I tested positive, and then I started bleeding and phoned the doctors and they described, you had a chemical pregnancy. So that was pretty tough. What happened then was the thing that wasn't quite normal. I left it a week. I went down to see family. I was grieving with my husband. It was one of those things where we felt like we could deal with it. It's okay. It happens really, really commonly. A lot of the time, women don't even know that they are pregnant because they just deem it as a late period. Yeah. So I spent that week obviously thinking, not pregnant anymore. I can have a drink, so we had a nice time on holiday. And then when I got back, another test I took, let me do that again. I took another test and it was blazing positive. Wow. Which was really strange. So I started getting a little bit panicked thinking, what's going on here? I had a negative test. I bled very heavily. It was much heavier than a normal period, and phoned the doctor. They took me in immediately for an observation, and they said that the increase in the test could indicate an ectopic pregnancy, where the egg implants in the fallopian tubes rather than the uterus. That is really dangerous because there is no room for that embryo to grow, and if left untreated it can rupture the tube and it is life-threatening. So they sent me immediately for an emergency scan. Thankfully there was nothing in my tubes, which was good. So I said, well, why am I getting positive tests then? What's happening? And they said, we can see something, but it looks far too early to be the pregnancy that you detected 2 weeks ago. That then they took a blood test and they said that my HCG level, which is the hormone that indicates you're pregnant, was pretty high, and it indicated I was about 4 weeks pregnant. At this point, I was really confused, because if this was the pregnancy that I detected a few weeks earlier, I should have been 6 weeks along, not 4 weeks. So what most likely happened is I had 2 eggs that released at different times. Both were fertilised, but as one of them was miscarrying, the other one implanted.
Oh, wow.
Which was crazy.
Yeah.
So I spent a full week grieving a pregnancy to then be told, actually, that there is something there. It's just a different one. I had a lot of blood tests, and they told me that unfortunately my HCG wasn't rising how it was supposed to. I still held on to hope that this pregnancy was going to continue. And they kept rescanning me. They said, yeah, it's developing. Your HCG is rising. It's just not rising quite as much as we want to. It's almost on the cusp. So I had a lot of hope there. Bearing in mind, this has been a few weeks since I had that positive test, and it went from I'm pregnant to I'm not pregnant to I'm pregnant to it might not develop in the space of a few weeks, which emotionally is pretty devastating.
Well, it's still trying to do everything else as well. You're still at work, aren't you?
Well, luckily, my manager said that I needed to be signed off while going through all this. She's been fantastic through all of this. So she said, you need to be signed off until you know what's happening. Within that time, we had so many things booked. Me and my husband, we went to a gig in Manchester to see Supertrunk. We also travelled to Cornwall for a friend's wedding. I drove from Manchester to Cornwall in one day, and it was crazy.
That was fun.
Also being pregnant, but maybe not pregnant. So we then went to a friend's wedding, and then we also travelled a little bit further south in Cornwall for my husband's birthday.
Oh, nice.
So all of this was going on. My head was all over the place. Tried to enjoy our holiday down in Cornwall, because the Monday when we came back was the day of the scan, and it was this, is it not? So then when I did have the scan, they said that it looked like the embryo had stopped developing at sort of 6.5 weeks, which would have been while I was in Cornwall. They said because there had been development from the previous scan, they couldn't help at that point. I needed to wait another week. Because there needed to be no development between scans for them to declare it a full miscarriage. They said my body might take care of it in the meantime, but if not, after the scan in a week, they would give me the options. I did go back a week later, and they had said that nothing had happened, that it had completely stopped developing, and I decided to go down a surgical route. The medical route is they give you a medication to cramp and for your body to expel the pregnancy. The natural route is to wait until your body deals with yourself. But both of those options seemed far too emotionally taxing for me at that point, because it had been sort of 6 or 7 weeks of just this absolute mayhem, and I was exhausted, completely exhausted. So I opted for the surgical route, and they booked me in the next day, and I had what is called a D&C. So I had that done, and I think my mum and my husband were both there when I sort of woke up. It was my first time under general anaesthetic. I was so nervous, but everyone at the hospital was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So my mum and my husband were there, and they said that they couldn't believe how strong I was being. But the reality is that I was just a bit numb from everything.
Yeah.
I didn't have the energy to be emotional about it. I just needed it to be done. I needed it to be over.
Yeah.
After so long of waiting to see whether or not something was going to happen and having that hope, it was too hard to express that emotion. Obviously, I did have a significant amount of time off work, sort of from that time in October when I started to miscarry until I started to come back in January on a phase return. And I needed that time, definitely. I felt all right for the first few days after the D&C, but then things did start to really happen with my mental health and feeling really, really low. And it's a grieving process.
Yeah.
You know, you've lost something. And I think for me, it wasn't just that I'd lost a pregnancy. It wasn't that I got a positive test and then I bled a few weeks later. It was the massive emotional turmoil that I went through with everything that happened.
I could imagine it was just really complex, just getting your head around just the whole up and down of it, the medical, you know, just even the medical terminology that was getting thrown at you to try and understand it all you didn't really get a chance to, did you? I don't think
And I think as well, having ADHD, I was previously on medication, but when you fall pregnant, unless there is a significant danger to you, they do take you off ADHD medication immediately. So my doctor put my prescription and my case back to the psychiatrist. So to also go through ADHD medication withdrawal, to not have the support of that medication going through something so emotional and so it was physically draining as well because I had the symptoms of pregnancy. I had the nausea, I had the fatigue, body aches, cramps. It was all there. So to have that on top of it all, it was just, I don't really know how I got through it. I think I was just on survival mode the entire time, really.
Yeah, I bet, and especially, you know, with the ADHD stuff, just feeling knackered anyway, the overwhelming sense of just being overwhelmed and not being able to take in information and stuff. So coming off those meds and having all of that going off is just like two prongs of horrible, horrible experiences, isn't it? Because, you know, being off, when I've had times just off meds anyway, without anything else going off, it is hard. So I just can't imagine how it must have been going through it. What was the, I guess, family support and your own self-care around that?
Well, the family support was brilliant. I think anyone who's been through it will know that as much as your partner wants to support you, they don't know what it is and what it's like and how you're feeling. So my husband massively struggled with this idea that I might be pregnant, like I might not be, and those were the terms that he used, and I had to almost defend myself a bit and say, no, I am pregnant. I don't know if this embryo is going to develop. I don't know if it's going to become a living baby, and that is what's so hard. And we kind of had a conversation about it, and he said for him to be able to process it, he needed to think of it as I am pregnant or I'm not.
Right, yeah.
So then that was really tough on me. I felt like I was defending myself a little bit and sort of almost defending this little embryo at the same time. But, you know, he was wonderful. He really does take care of me. And I really, really appreciate him for that. And my mum as well was just wonderful because my husband doesn't drive. She drove us to and from the hospital. You know, she'd come round and she'd sort of take care of me when my husband had to go to work. So, you know, those two people in my life were just absolute rocks, really.
No, it's great. And I guess, how was it even talking about it at the time? Was, you know, I don't know, to your husband and mum, I guess, was it just those two you sort of were talking about it too, or did you feel like you needed wider support? Or
I did have a few friends as well, sort of my close friends that I discussed it with. I was very matter of fact about it all. Okay. I thought that being too emotional about it was too hard. Yep. Connecting with that emotion was really tough before I had time to process it properly. So I was very matter of fact about, you know, this was a pregnancy that didn't develop past a certain point and they took it out because it wasn't going to grow anymore. Whereas I know that other people who have gone through miscarriage do want to have that real emotional connection. I would not criticise anyone in any way on how they want to cope with something like this. It's very personal, but personally to me, I needed to be very matter of fact about it. Because if I did try and attach those emotions to things like, you know, a baby that died, I don't know if I could cope with that. So I think a few of my friends, they didn't really think that I was struggling as much as I was because I hid it quite well. Yeah. I sort of said, yeah, I'm really struggling, but it is what it is. It's very matter of fact. You know, I can try again. It happens a lot. It happens to a lot of women. It's fine. You know, when in reality, I'd go home and I'd be crying at the littlest of things. You know, I could see, you know, adverts with babies and adverts for pregnancy tests and I'd be fine. But then, you know, just one line in a movie could have me absolutely sobbing and just heartbroken. So I think that's when I knew that I needed to sort of address that emotional impact that it had on me rather than trying to be too matter of fact about it.
Yeah. And when I guess when you did come to address it, what were the emotions like?
Talking about it and talking about it honestly. And they say when you go through a traumatic event, you need to debrief. And that's almost allowing your brain to put it where it's supposed to be, put it in the box, in the file, wherever in your brain that it's going to fit, so that when you go to open that box, it doesn't all come spilling out and crash the system. That's something a therapist told me once, and it's always been my mindset of where can I put this? Where in my brain can I store this information so that it's okay? But talking about it with people that understood, but also talking about it with people that didn't understand, that hadn't gone through that. So then I could almost be my own advocate and I could sort of say, this is how I felt, and nobody could tell me otherwise. You know, being able to kind of sit there and say, it destroyed me for a while, but now I'm rebuilding myself. And just having people listen, you know, having people non-judgmental and ask questions that are, how do I put this? Factual questions. So ones that aren't too emotional. Things, one of my best friends is autistic and she always said, you know, can I ask you questions about this because I don't understand? And I said, yes, please ask away. She said, I just want to know as much as possible so I can support you.
So some really good questions that can be asked. I guess there's times where they may not have all been helpful questions. You don't have to, but if there's any, experiences you may have had that maybe set you back a bit.
Well, I think I disliked it when people had their own opinion and when people tried to tell me that I needed to feel a certain way. Yeah. You know, I've had people tell me that it wasn't much of a big deal, that it wasn't far enough along for me to feel sad about it. I've even had somebody say, oh, that's not a miscarriage, that's a late period. Things like that. And those things, unless you've been through it, you're not going to understand. And there are some people that do go through it that aren't as emotionally attached to it, that do say things like, oh, you know, it just wasn't meant to be. But having that respect and just not pushing your judgments and your viewpoints on somebody. I did have somebody tell me that I needed to kind of get over it a bit quicker, and that if I was still talking about it in sort of 6 months' time, then people might think, oh, just shut up. Yeah. And they might get annoyed at me. And it sort of, it clicked in my head. I thought, is that what you're thinking right now? You know, are you thinking right now that you want me to shut up because it's making you feel uncomfortable? And I think it's okay for people to feel uncomfortable when someone's talking about something so emotionally taxing and so devastating, really, to somebody else. But just sitting back and just listening really is the best thing that you can do.
Yeah, definitely. 'Cause, you know, you've had to go through this, and you're allowed as much time as you need to, you know, go through that process, and it will always be there.
Yeah.
It's not going to disappear. So why should there be a time stamped on, you know, how long you can talk about it or how long you can share it? And there's always people going to be going through this. And the more people talk about it and share it, the more others can listen and know they're not alone, and they're not, you know, going through this by themselves and stuff. Yeah, it's really. Is there any advice you would give to someone who's maybe going through this now, or maybe has been? Because I think you seem to have come a really long way in being able to grieve, you know, manage your emotions and look after your mental health. I think from us being in quite a dark place to now. So yeah, is there any sort of advice you could?
I think lean on the resources that you have.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was tough for me, but find other resources. You know, there are charities that can support you. There's Tommy's, there's Petals. I'm booked in for a counselling session with Petals. Even though I feel like I've come through quite a lot, I think it's still important for me to check in with that and get some professional support, because there's still things that can trigger that grief. And for people going through it, to be kind to themselves. You know, I did spend a lot of time thinking, could it have been my fault? Is there something wrong with me? Is there something wrong with my body? Is it something I ate? Did I not take enough vitamins? Did I take too many vitamins? Did I exercise too hard? Did I push it too hard? There's going to be a million questions going through your head. And the underlying thing is, it's not your fault. You know, it's not a punishment. It's not, you know, so for people who are religious, they can rely a lot on their faith to help them, and they see that there is reason behind things like this. But personally, I find that harder to accept. I think things happen not for a reason. Sometimes horrible things happen just because, you know, it's not your fault and you're not being punished. So you don't have to punish yourself. Find that support wherever you can, be kind to yourself, and just know that you didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, I think it was really good. And yeah, I think reaching out to those services, you know, like you mentioned, and SANS, and, you know, all those, we'll put links to them all in the description so people can reach out to them, and trying to find that network. You know, you've had, you know, your husband and your mum, but it is always good to reach out to the professionals, because some people you can get through it yourself, can't you? And you can go through that process, look after your mental health, sort of build yourself back up, and it's fine. But like you said, it's always good just to keep checking in and understand those little things, like you were saying then. You know, really interesting. Just before, I guess, we finish, is there anything you'd like to, I guess, finish up on?
So one thing that has really helped me is setting myself a challenge.
Okay.
And it's something that I can really focus on and build on. So I took up the challenge to run 29 miles in February.
Oh, wow.
And that is for charity. That is for SANS charity. I have already reached my fundraising goal, but anything else is absolutely fantastic. My knees are aching, my ankle's aching, my back's hurting, but I am still out nearly every day, running in the rain, in the wind. Talk to people if you know that they've gone through miscarriage, no matter how long ago it was, even if it's been years, check in with them, because I still have it in my head about the timeline of what could have been, you know. And when it was Christmas, I was supposed to be 12 weeks, which is normally when you have your first scan and you announce it to people. So check in with those people that you know have been through miscarriage, because they're still in that future without the child.
100%, 100%. I think that's, really valuable words, that. Thank you.
But I know how lucky I am to have the support network that I do. So recognising that, and also recognising that there are people out there that don't have a decent support network, it makes me feel very grateful to the people that I have, the job that I have, which has been really flexible, the manager that has been really understanding, you know, my family and friends who did check in on me and who still do, that's made me feel like I can get through something, that I can fall apart and rebuild myself.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. When this episode comes out, we'll do some posts around support available and stuff like that. So if you are listening, it'd be great if you could just go onto one of our social accounts and just share that onwards, because you never know who might see it and who really might need to see that, so they can reach out and get the support they need.
Yeah. I kept thinking it'll all be worth it if I have this baby, and then I didn't, and it was almost like, well, it was all for nothing. And then all of it felt a little bit like for nothing.
Yeah.
And I was angry at that as well. And I was very angry. But that's part of a grieving process, isn't it? About being so angry at the situation and bargaining and depression and, you know, but grief isn't a lined process. You know, it's not, it's all over the place. You know, one day you can be depressed, the next day you can be angry, the next day you can think you're over it, and the next day you're really, really depressed again. You know, and I think that, again, is something that people don't understand.
No, definitely.
That they don't just think, oh, you're over it now then.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'll never be over it. It'll always be something that happened.
So, thank you, Poppy. It's been amazing being able to share, you know, your story. And yeah, thank you for everyone for listening. Like I said, we'll be doing some posts on socials around the support available, some more information. It'll be in the description as well. If you're not already, do follow us on social media at DCCMHSP. And if you're listening on YouTube or Spotify, do like and subscribe to the podcast. And yeah, you've been listening to the Let's Chat Derbyshire podcast. Thank you.